Hello and welcome to the Gear4music podcast. I am down here today in London at the podcast show and I am joined by a very special guest. It is Adam Buxton. Hello, Adam. How are you?
Hi, Jordan. I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in your hot box.
It's a very hot box. So what Shure have done, Shure are here at the podcast show, and what they've done, they've built themselves a kind of like podcast room, and it's a bit warm. You can see everything going on outside in this big window, but it's a nice little dead podcast space where obviously we can do what we're doing. So
it's a sweaty foam-lined punishment chamber
yeah,
for naughty podcasters.
Just like us.
Yeah.
So obviously I know you were here yesterday giving talks and stuff. How did that go? How did you...
That was great. We were using a headphone system by a rival brand.
Oh, we won't name those.
We won't name them. But it was really good because everyone was wearing wireless headphones and I was playing tracks for an album that I'm trying to put together.
Yes.
And it was the first time that anyone had heard them. So they weren't finished. The album is far from finished.
So was it quite scary to try?
It was really nerve-wracking. I felt very exposed.
Yeah, I bet.
And vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, it always is when you're putting out like your own music out into the world. And it's like, I really hope people like latch onto this the way that you might as well.
Well, my problem is that I feel like I've got no right to put out any music. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like, obviously I do. Everyone can put out music.
Yeah, you can do what you want.
Music, that's the beautiful thing about music. But at the same time, I feel in my more, self-hating moments, that there's so many other musicians who are so much more talented than I am. And I am a real non-musician. You know, someone like Brian Eno, for example, calls himself a non-musician.
Okay, yeah.
But he's not a non-musician.
No, he's a full-on musician. Of course
He's an amazingly accomplished musician. And his instincts, his musical instincts, whether he can actually read music or tell you exactly how to form chord shapes on a guitar or not, he just has very musical instincts.
Okay.
I don't really. You know, I've got sort of cartoon music instincts.
Yeah, because obviously you do quite a lot of your jingles and stuff like that. But I mean, I've listened to your jingles and stuff. It's quite a big part of like, I guess, your identity and your podcast in a way. But I think a lot of those jingles, when I listen to them, I'm like, this is like so well thought out. So I guess to me, when I listen to them, I'm like, yeah, this is clearly a musician that is making these jingles. So
that's nice. I'm glad. I mean, I feel like I do have my moments. That's the thing. I love the process. I love sitting there with my laptop open. I'm using Logic. And I've started trying to play the guitar again after years and years of not doing that. Yeah. I sent some of the songs I'd done to a musical friend of mine, quite an accomplished musician. And their criticism was... they said, why are you trying to play the guitar? That's not really your instrument.
Okay, yeah.
You're a good keyboard guy and, you know, synthesizers and loops. Yeah. Don't worry about just using the loops and the presets. That's okay. Yeah. That's where you're strongest.
Yeah, fair.
Stay with what you're good at. But I've slightly ignored that advice because I really like just playing with a...
Yeah, it's good to feel, because I'm a guitarist myself.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
I find it quite hard to do the opposite, where if I'm sitting at a computer and I'm just kind of making music with synthesizers or keyboards, I find it hard to kind of feel the music in a way. Whereas with a guitar, or I've recently started to learn drums, but like, because it's so physical and like you're with the instrument, it's like you feel the vibe a lot more.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that's a similar kind of thing. That's why you like kind of doing it with the guitar, maybe.
It's just very therapeutic to hold the guitar, to cradle the guitar.
Yeah, totally.
And to sort of just make chord shapes and move up and down the fretboard. And also I'm aware of what the chords are in a very rudimentary way.
Yeah, if you play keys, you kind of, you know your way around. And
well, with keys, I don't know what...
Oh, you're just kind of winging it?
Massive wingles. Yeah. And I don't know what the chords are or anything like that. I'm just like, that sounds nice. And it sounds nice when I press that one. And then often what I do is I go back into the MIDI file and, you know, write in notes here and there and move notes around manually so that they sound good and flesh out chords that way, experimenting like, what if I move it a couple of steps up here? Oh, yeah, that sounds like a chord. Yeah. But with the guitar, at least I'm like, that's a C.
Yeah, you know where you're.
That's a D, and that's.
And then once you record it, that's it. You can't change that. So you kind of have to make sure that you're really you really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you played the album to the people yesterday at that Tape Notes podcast that you did do, how do you think it was received?
They freaked out.
Yeah?
No, I think it went...
Everyone's just applauding, standing up. They're like, wow!
They couldn't believe it. It was like first playback of Nevermind by Nirvana. They knew it was a game changer and that music would never be the same again.
Exactly.
No, it was good, I think. I mean, it was hard to tell because we were all wearing the headphones, so I couldn't really hear their reaction.
Yeah. I mean, if you got nodding heads or you got like...
Yeah. There was nodding heads and no one cried no one walked out. So that was good. Mm-hmm. And also the music it's not funny. Like a couple of them are funny and there's funny elements to them, but they're not straightforward comedy songs.
Yeah.
So that was the thing that was most nerve-wracking for me is how are people going to respond to songs that are occupying a slightly different tonal space than my jingles do.
Yeah. So, I mean, if for anyone at home who might not be aware, obviously you have your own podcast, which is the Adam Buxton podcast. And on there, you obviously do your own jingle. So I guess that's why people would assume that it's going to be comedy-based or these kind of jingles and stuff like that.
I think that's why I got the record contract.
Yeah. They were like, "Oh, this is going to be great! A whole album full of crazy jingles."
Exactly.
And
do more jingles.
Yeah,
a little bit longer. That's all. Jobs are good.
So with your podcast, so obviously, seeing as we are here at the podcast show, with your podcast, I mean, how would you kind of describe your podcast? Because I feel like when listening to it myself, a lot of episodes are different. Obviously, you have your really comedy-driven, funny episodes with Adam and Joe, and then you've got more kind of serious episodes, like the one you did recently with Tom Hanks, where you just kind of dive into his life. How would you really kind of describe your podcast to someone that's never heard of it before?
Well, I always think of it as a series of conversations, friendly conversations, with people generally that I like or I'm interested in. That's the policy that I try and stick to when getting hold of guests.
Yeah.
Like it's got to be someone I'm genuinely interested in. I'm not saying that always happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get a guest and for whatever reason, I mean, they're sort of interesting in a more broad way and it would be a bit daft to pass them up.
Yeah.
So I do have those which are a bit more like traditional interviews where I'm going in and asking more basic questions. But the dream episode for me sounds like two friends talking or a couple of people getting to know each other.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, meet someone at a party or maybe you go around for dinner somewhere and you get sat next to someone interesting and it's that conversation of like, what do you do? Oh, right. Okay. What's that like? And then maybe you click and then maybe you start revealing all kinds of things to each other.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's quite a lot of me, I suppose. I mean, I do try not to wang on about myself the entire time, but it does happen.
I quite like your intros with Rosie.
Yeah, okay.
They're great. I love those little like, and then every now and again throughout the episode, you like break out of the interview and you do your little walk with Rosie. I think they're really nice. I think it breaks it up quite nice because then you're not, in a way, as a listener, you're not like quite fatigued by it. Not like you would be, but like, do you know what I mean? At least it breaks it up quite nicely for anyone that's listening at home. Yeah.
So they start a typical episode starts with the first jingle. And then it's, as you say, me and Rosie walking around the fields where I live in Norfolk, out in the countryside. Rosie is my dog friend, half whippet, half poodle.
Yeah.
And she walks around with me and I have this little dictaphone, which I have right here. And I just carry that with me and waffle away. And we're out in nature. You can hear the birds singing.
Yeah, that's always nice.
Or you can hear the rain coming down or the wind blowing. And it's just a nice way of getting out of the indoor environment and having a different kind of texture to the whole thing.
Kind of sets
we get in. Yeah, and then in that intro, I'll be explaining who I'm talking to, as well as waffling about my domestic life for a couple of minutes. I'll talk about the person that I'm going to be speaking to in the main body of the podcast.
So with podcasting, I mean, over the last couple of years, it's like really blown up. Like especially since the whole pandemic thing. Everyone
is the bubble even bursting now? What do you think? Are we in the recession years of podcasting?
Yeah, it's just like post-podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know because obviously, if we were, there wouldn't be this, right? There wouldn't be the podcast show.
Well, I can never tell because I sometimes think that you you get a couple of years lag. And maybe the pandemic was the peak when people were stuck at home.
Yeah.
And podcasts really thrived then. It was a great time to be a podcaster.
Yeah, it was. I wish I would have started my own podcast then.
Yeah.
It would be great. So with that, like you've been doing it for quite a while. I think you were kind of podcasting before podcasting was really cool. So it's been, a good few years for yourself doing it.
Yeah, 2006, I think, me and Joe Cornish started.
Yeah, that's crazy to think. Like, I don't think I really heard of a podcast existing.
Well, there was Ricky Gervais's podcast when he was on XFM, London radio station. He and Stephen Merchant and Carl Pilkington, who was a producer at XFM, they had their radio station. They had their radio show, which was very popular, and then they started doing a podcast, which was also very popular. And they started charging. They were the first people that I was aware of that ever charged to listen to a podcast £1. And everyone was like, what? You can't do that. No one's going to pay to listen to a couple of guys waffling.
Just turn it on the radio. It's the same thing.
Yeah. But they did, and it was a smash. And then I think that was a signal to a lot of people that, oh, look, podcasting. This is a thing, and you can charge for it. Charging for it was never something I felt like I wanted to do or needed to do. But me and Joe started doing podcast versions of the radio show that we did on XFM, Saturday afternoon show, which we started doing in 2003, I think, filling in for Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant when they were doing the second series of The Office. But that was the first time me and Joe had ever done radio. And in those days, it felt like a bit of a step down because the hierarchy of media, as it was then, maybe still now, is at the top, movies. You got to be in a movie.
Movies,
If you don't do a movie, you're nobody.
Yeah.
And then TV. And then radio. And that was the kind of snobby hierarchy, I think, that most people in the media had. And we'd been on TV, me and Joe, so it was like, oh, we're going to do radio now, are we? That's a bit of a come down. And we weren't very good. And we weren't really used to it. And
it's a completely different ball game. Like, if you're on TV, you got a script, you know what you're saying, you know what you're doing. If you're writing the sketches like you guys did, then you kind of know what to expect. Whereas it's like anything can really happen in the moment on radio because it's always live.
Exactly. And Joe, I think, my comedy wife, Joe Cornish, successful director of films like Attack the Block and TV shows like Lockwood & Co. But he's good in the moment. Like, he's less angsty and self-conscious than I am. But I'm quite in my head a lot. So I loved doing the TV show because we could craft it and edit it, and we made it all ourselves. The Adam and Joe show, it was called, in the 90s on Channel 4. And I didn't have that with the radio. I'd just go in and do a 3-hour show, and I'd come out, I'd feel wrung out a lot of the time. And I'd just feel like, I wasn't good on that. And also, we'd be getting a lot of texts from listeners on XFM going, am I allowed to swear? Going, why don't you infantile cunts shut up and play some more music?
Wow. Yeah, we might have to bleep that one.
Might have to bleep that.
I wasn't expecting that swear word. We'll definitely bleep that one out. But no,
But they didn't bleep it for us on the texts.
No. So you're just reading that, you're like, well, we've just got sacked.
I thought that one really stuck with me. There's always bits of criticism that lodge in your head. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. So when we started doing the podcast from the XFM show, and I was allowed to go home with the DATs of the 3-hour show and edit on Pro Tools as I was using then, that was amazing. That made me feel really good. I was like, great, I can get rid of all those bits where I'm just being totally boring.
Yeah, you can just cut it all out,
and keep the bits that work. And it was such a liberating, enjoyable process. And then from there, I think it was the success of that XFM podcast, in a small way, that led to us covering for Sean Keaveney on Six Music, BBC Six Music, when he was on holiday in 2007, I think. And then we ended up getting a regular show there. And actually, I really loved that part of our career, and in no way was it a step down. I feel like it was, in a lot of ways, the kind of peak of what me and Joe did.
You to...
I love doing the TV show, and there's lots of things I'm proud of in that. But I really loved the radio show.
So how do you think, I mean, podcasting in those years has really changed? Because, now when I think of a podcast, I think of it kind of like we're doing here today. We've got the audio recording, we're recording the video. It's going to go on YouTube. It's going to go in the regular places a podcast would go. And how do you think that's kind of changed over the years that you've been doing it?
Well, the thing, I'm going to sound like a real old guy, which I sort of am, but everyone is filming their stuff now. Yeah. Everyone is focused on ways to scale the show and reach the widest possible audience. And YouTube and the facility of streaming platforms and faster broadband speeds means that video is much easier for people to consume now than it was in, when we were starting to podcast at the dawn of YouTube in the mid-2000s.
Yeah, it didn't even really exist.
No, it'd take half an hour to download a kind of 10-minute video in 300p or whatever it was.
Yeah, because I know like a lot of people, I mean, there might be a few people who've said it here today at like some of the talks, but like they always say that podcast is almost kind of like a triple threat, because you can do the Spotify and put it as just audio only. You can do the video, and because you filmed it, then you can take cuts and you can put that into socials, into TikTok, Instagram, and all that kind of thing. Like you said, to try and get that wider space. Do you try to incorporate that, or are you just focused on kind of, you do what you do because you know that it works? You're not really gonna like try and change what you're doing?
I think so, yeah. Because to me, it's like, well, how is your time best spent? And what's the goal? For me, the goal is to make the actual audio episodes as good as possible and to spend all my available time on doing that. On prepping, to talk to certain guests. Some guests you don't need to prep so much, you just turn up and waffle away. But other guests you feel like, especially writers and stuff, like you got to read the books and you got to do this. It takes a while. So I want to put all my available time into that. If you start videoing stuff, that's just a whole other layer of time that needs to be spent lighting it, making it look decent, because people make such a good job of videoing these shows. They got nice studio spaces. They got those groovy big bulbs with orange filaments LEDs, in them hanging everywhere.
I mean,
all that stuff. They got people have got cameras on tracks.
They got like whole crews and everything.
It's nuts. And I just think, well, that's TV. And the thing, like, I'm not saying you can't do that, obviously. You do what you want. But the thing I love about podcasting is the freedom it gives you to create a very intimate aural experience, a headphone experience. And I think that connection you get with someone talking to you just on headphones in a way that you can consume wherever you are, walking, on a bus, on a plane, wherever you happen to be. I think that's a really special and unique connection that only the audio podcast medium offers over any other, really. Even radio, and I love radio, but generally on broadcast radio you're keeping everything tight. Everyone's terrified of dead air. So
you're trying to fill up as much space.
And you're just squeezing everything down. There's no real long form conversations. And the long form audio conversation that you get on a podcast, I think is that's the thing that I'm trying to get as good as possible. I'm not interested in visuals.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So I mean, with being at the podcast show, obviously there's a lot of kind of up and coming podcasters here. Would you have any kind of tips or anyone for someone who is looking to start their own podcast or has their own podcast, is trying to grow it? What is something that you could give them as a tip?
Yeah, you see, I'm not good at growing tips because I'm in a privileged position, right?
Totally,
like I've got a sort of group of listeners who have stuck with me for quite a long time, and there's a core there that are fairly loyal. And that's all I need. I don't need to reach a much bigger audience, and I'm not really interested in being like number one podcast or anything like that.
You're just kind of doing your own thing.
I just want to protect that group and service them as well as I can.
But I think maybe that is the tip.
Maybe
right?
that's the tip.
That's the tip.
I think so. I think you have to figure out what is unique about what you're doing. What is really strong about whatever you're doing in podcast terms.
And like just be passionate about what you want to talk about, what your podcast is, and
protect that thing. And do that thing as well as you possibly can. And just think, like, I sometimes I think what would I think of this podcast if I wasn't me, if I was listening in, if I didn't know me? Yeah. Maybe if I thought I was a bit of a dick, if I thought like Adam Buxton, it's not really my thing. Yeah. What would I think if I was listening to it? Mm-hmm. So I try and, I'm not making it for that person. No. But I'm trying to get a different perspective on it.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes that does shake you out of a certain amount of complacency and remind you to pull back on certain indulgent bits or tighten things up. I think that's my big tip always is I think you should edit things. Or at least if you're able to, and if you have the time, editing things will generally improve them massively. And if you get rid of little bits, like if you're listening back to something you've recorded and you're slightly zoning out for a couple of minutes, then that's what's going to happen to the listener as well. Yeah. If you don't like it, you recorded it, or you're not grabbed by it, then the listener definitely won't be. Yeah. So just get rid of those bits and tighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
If you were to start if you were to start this all over again.
Yes.
And Adam Buxton's podcast never existed, and you're just like, right, I'm going to start a podcast now in 2023. What would you do? How would you go? Would you go about anything differently? Or what would your podcast show be now?
It would be a K-pop reality podcast. I
love that.
I'd go out, I'd join a band. It would be about, I'd have reconstructive surgery to make me look younger and more attractive.
I mean, you find it where you are. Just keep it. I think that's the stick. You know, it's like this man here is part of a K-pop group.
54-year-old British white man goes and tries to infiltrate the world of K-pop.
That's a show right there.
Yeah,
that's definitely something.
That's what I'd do. No, I don't think. I mean, I generally tend to make things up as I go along, and it's a question of, there's a lot of my life and my experiences in whatever I do. Yeah. I'm sort of sharing. Yeah, it's like I keep on thinking of it in terms of being at the pub with your friend.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's what people tend to say to me as well. It's like, and at the end of the podcast, during the pandemic, I started sort of hugging the listener. Yeah. I'd take the dictaphone, and I'd just go like
this. Just hold it,
and say, hey, come on. You're all right.
Yeah, really make the listener feel like
we'll be okay.
They're part of it.
Yeah, which is a sort of cheesy thing to do, I guess. But when I listened back to it, I thought, oh yeah, that does sound like a hug. Yeah. So I kept it in, and I think it's a nice way to end the shows.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I thank you so much for joining us today. It really means a lot for you to be able to sit down and talk with us.
Thanks, man.
One last thing before we go. On the count of 3, I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and we're both going to say our favorite cereal at the same time. Can we do that?
I haven't eaten cereal for a while.
Or what your favorite? I'm trying
to remember because I used to love cereal. I'm trying to remember the name of the cereal. Like, okay.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Cinnamon Grahams.
Cornflakes.
Ah, nice. That's a good choice.
Cinnamon Grahams. Cinnamon Grahams.
They are the best.
I love cinnamon.
Some might say goated.
Goated, greatest of all time.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm totally down with all the lingo.
All the lingos, yeah. But thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully, if you are watching this, you learned something a little bit more about podcasting. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe down below. And obviously, go check out Adam's podcast if you haven't yet. So yeah, thank you so much, Adam. And see you next time, guys. Bye.
Bye.